Welcome to the Savvy Podcasting for Entrepreneurs podcast, a place for podcasters to learn what's actually working in the world of podcasting and how to use their podcast to generate consistent leads in their business. I'm your host, Jenny, and I'm so excited you're here. Hey, Savvies, welcome back to another episode of the podcast. So I thought it would be fun to do an ABCs of podcasting episode today so that newbie or aspiring podcasters can really familiarize themselves with different podcast terms. I haven't included every single podcast term ever because I didn't want to do like multiple, because some letters would have multiple definitions that could be under them. So I just picked the ones that I thought would be the most important to learn. But if you're not a newbie to podcasting, this episode may not be as helpful. So just a quick warning. I wanted to tell you that in case you just like, let's skip this one. But hey, you never know, you might learn something. So yeah, let's get into it. So first up, we have A, obviously, which is audiogram. So an audiogram is essentially what you see on Instagram or social media. It's a still image that plays a portion of your episode, plus it has like a waveform typically. Sometimes it has like captions. So basically just like an audio version, quick little snippet of an important piece from your episode, and it can be used on social media and emails, all that stuff. So it just entices people to go ahead and listen to the full episode. Next up, we have bed. So a bed is not like a physical bed, but having music underlaid of your speaking. So you're talking and there's music like underlaid from that. It's probably not the technical term, but that's what I like to say, like a musical underlay when you're talking. So think about your intro, outro. Sometimes you'll have your music kind of playing underneath your speaking, but it's like lower, right? C, condenser mic. So I actually have condenser mic and another microphone on here, but a condenser mic is essentially like, if you think of brands, it's going to be the Blue Yeti mic. That is a condenser mic. And essentially a condenser mic just picks up more sound around you than a dynamic mic, which is what we're going to talk about later, but it's better for very sound treated rooms so that it doesn't pick up a bunch of random background noise and things like that. That's what condenser mic is. It is the Blue Yeti mic is very pretty, but I don't usually recommend it because it does pick up a lot more background noise than a dynamic mic would. A DAW, or a digital audio workspace. So this is like whatever you use to edit your episodes, or if you're doing like solo episodes, you record your episodes. So this is like Audacity, Descript, or GarageBand. There's tons of DAW, or I guess you could call it a DAW. There's tons of those. So whatever you use to edit episodes, whatever you use to record episodes, that is like not a online cloud-based one like Zoom, that is a DAW or a DAW. All right, E. So for E, we have EQ, and that stands for equalization, and it is a software plugin or piece of hardware that allows us to shape a sound by adjusting the gain or volume of a sound at selected points. So that is very useful to use when editing episodes. Next up, we have a folder. So this is random, but I feel like podcast episode storage is really important. So storing your episodes in a folder for each episode is key, in my opinion. So it's not just a bunch of random files with no home. Next up is G. For G, we have guest. Obviously, most of you guys know what a guest is, but that is where someone is a guest on your show. So they come on your show, you interview them, and they are a guest. All right. H, host. So a host would be your podcast host, which is what syndicates your episodes to different podcast players. So you upload your episode into the host, and it syndicates your episodes where they need to go, essentially. And you can store the file, the short show notes or episode description, anything like that. A host could also be the host of the show, but I thought that was way too obvious. So I prefer to use H as podcast host, the one who is hosting your files. I is intro. So the little jingle that you hear before each episode is called an intro. Next up is J, and that is jingle. So that could also be your actual intro, or it could just be used referring to the actual like music, not the talking portion of your episode. So jingle. Next up is K, and that is keywords. And keywords help other people find your podcast. So they're really important because if you're using these keywords for your episodes, more people are going to discover your episodes because they're typing in those keywords, and alas, they're finding you. So keywords are really important, and it's not something a lot of people think about. L is levels. So this refers to the loudness of your podcast, like the audio levels, right? Next up is M, and for M, we have microphone. Earlier, we talked about the condenser mic, and now we're talking about the dynamic mic, which is the mic that I recommend podcast hosts who are not super like audio savvy to use, because it is mainly just picking up your voice in the microphone. It's not going to pick up as much external audio as the condenser mic will. And yeah, highly recommend getting a dynamic mic. All right, next up we have N, and that is normalization. So normalization basically just evens your audio out and makes sure that it's like the same level, because sometimes when you're recording with a guest, they might sound louder than you because you guys have your mics at different levels. Normalization kind of levels out the audio and makes it level, essentially. Next up, we have the outro. So like the intro, this is something that is included in your episode, but it is at the end of your episode. So this is basically where you say, thanks so much for listening to today's episode, and you give them a call to action, whether that is to subscribe to the show, leave a rating or review, or even go check you out on social media, join your Facebook group, whatever that call to action is, you include that here. But it's essential to have a standard outro with every episode, in my opinion. All right, next up we have P, and for P, I have pop filter. So that is basically something that attaches to your microphone. That the technical definition is weird, so I'm not going to read it because it probably won't make sense. But basically, it eliminates the sound. I don't have mine on, so you might have heard that. You might have heard my noise, but it helps eliminate that P, the popping noise when people say P, and certain other letters that make that same noise. Next up is Q, and for Q we have quality. So in the way that I'm using this is just really, it can relate to the quality of your show. So it can relate to the audio quality, the quality of the content, the quality of the guests, the quality just as a whole. Next up we have R, and for R, I chose RSS feed. And this is basically what you share with other podcast platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, those, and you use this URL to share this URL with these platforms to help syndicate the episodes to the different podcasting apps. And when you sign up, you're basically just sharing this URL with them, and it's connecting with your host, and then basically just sharing the episodes to the platform that way. So you need that RSS feed to do this. And then you get an RSS feed when you create an account with your host. So like Libsyn or Buzzsprout or whatever you end up using for your host, you get this RSS feed when you create that account with whatever podcast host you end up choosing. All right, next up is S, and for S we have show notes. So if you're not familiar with show notes, that's basically includes a summary of what the episode talked about, some links mentioned, that kind of thing. They can be super duper basic with just a couple of bullet points and some links mentioned, or they can be more blog post style show notes, which I have an episode on if you guys are interested in listening. I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but it's the episode that I did recently with Laura Bowder. So go check it out and learn more about creating really amazing show notes. Next up, we have T, and then for T, I selected tracks, which is otherwise known as your recording. So you have if you're doing a guest episode, you have your main track, which is both you and the guest. And then you can have the guest track, which is just your guest, and your solo track, which is just you. So the tracks can the good thing about having multiple tracks, one per person, is you're able to edit each portion individually. So you don't have to worry about if it's all on one track, like cutting someone off or something. If you're editing them on separate tracks, it really helps create a higher quality edit because you're just able to isolate on that one track versus potentially cutting the other person that's speaking off. Next up, we have you. And for you, I selected uploading. So like uploading your episodes to your host or your website or whatever that may be. And then we have V. This one's really hard to come up with a word for or a term for. So I selected video podcast, which is basically like the video version of your podcast. If you interview guests and you record the audio and video and post it on YouTube, that is basically a video podcast. At W, we have a WAV file. That is just basically the file that you want to edit in because it is the highest quality. And then once you finish editing, you can convert it back to an MP3, which is what you would submit to the podcast. For why, we have YouTube. And I selected YouTube because I think even if you don't record your video of your podcast, you should still be syndicating your audio to YouTube just to give people over on that platform a chance to listen to your episodes. Obviously, those are not going to be like that super duper successful usually because when people are on YouTube, they're looking for a video, but it doesn't hurt to try. So that's why I included YouTube. And then last we have Zoom. So I know Zoom can be pretty controversial, but a lot of people use it to record their episodes because it is easy to use. Their guests are super familiar with it. They're super familiar with it. So it's just like a lower barrier to entry of learning more tech. So yeah, Zoom is just a place that you can record interviews. You can also use other things, but Zoom is great as well. It may not be the best audio quality ever, but it's really simple to use and your guests will know how to use it most likely. Yeah, it was so much fun coming up with all these different podcasting terms for each letter. Some were way easier than others as there were a variety of ones to choose from for each letter. Others, I was like almost pulling teeth trying to figure out what I should include because it was tough. I had to do some research because I was like, I don't know what to include for this letter. This letter's hard. But yeah, if you are planning on launching soon and you are feeling overwhelmed, I'd love to chat with you about it and ease your mind because it is a big mindset game. So head on over to Podcasting for Entrepreneurs on Instagram and let's talk about it. I'd love to help you get over the hump and start recording your episodes because that is usually the biggest barrier that people have. So yeah, that is all for today's episode. If you want to check out the show notes for this episode, head to savvypodcastingforentrepreneurs.com and I will see you in the next episode.
If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast player like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Stitcher and leave a review. You can find us at savvypodcastingforentrepreneurs.com and on Facebook at Savvy Podcasting for Entrepreneurs and Instagram at Savvy Podcasting. Make sure to join our free Facebook community for podcasters by going to savvypodcastingforentrepreneurs.com/community and join in on the exclusive community just for Savvy Podcasting for Entrepreneurs listeners. I'll see you there.